afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on what time zone you're from. And welcome to this session of Meer and Anushree MDRP. As you all know, today we're going to be discussing UDI requirements for medical devices. What is UDI? Why is UDI required? All such many questions that you have, we are going to get answers from our expert speaker, Vincent. So I'm going to give Vincent the floor to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his background in the field of medical devices. Over to you, Vincent.
Thank you. Thank you for your introduction. My name is Vincent. I'm a consultant at Medical Device Project, which is a company in the Netherlands. And we advise companies, startups, scale-ups, and established companies on quality assurance and regulatory affairs questions. Myself, I started in this field about 7 or 8 years ago. I was educated in molecular biology, but I do have an history in IT, in web development. So the whole idea about databases and identification, that really was really interesting to me. So I would call myself a UDI enthusiast. And actually, a few years ago, we already implemented the UDI at some companies. Back then, I was working with a company that produced class 1 simple disposable devices. But I myself worked at all kinds of different medical device companies, including class 3 soft tissue implants. And now, as a consultant, of course, I see all kinds of medical device companies. And one of the biggest hurdles in the MDR, aside from the regular administrative stuff, is the implementation of the UDI system. But like I said, I'm a UDI enthusiast myself. I think it's a very good system to identify medical devices. So I'm happy to give a little explanation about it.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Vincent. And I agree with you. I think it's also a very important identification system for devices. And especially when it comes to UDIs and different types of codes for devices, everybody sort of thinks like, no, I'm not going to be handling that. The regulatory team will look into it. Then they will say the quality team will look into this. And it just keeps getting juggled around. So it's very important that now, especially when we are all trying really hard to understand medical devices, regulatory quality requirements, I think this is an integral part of it. We need to understand what UDI is all about, because frankly, it crowds my LinkedIn feed. I mean, there's always some post or another about UDI, how UDI is UDAMED, what is the implementation, what's the basic UDI. So I thought, why not get an expert? And I know you're being humble and saying that you're an enthusiast, but you're here because you are an expert in UDI. So without wasting any time, I think we want to start off by talking a little bit about UDI itself. Like we keep hearing about UDI codes. Now, what is the purpose of a UDI code? Is it assigned to product families or a single product? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, to answer your question, it's for both. Most people think of the UDI as the QR code thingy or the barcode thingy that's on the device or on the label, but it is actually a system to ensure that you can identify the products on all levels. So it's you have the basic UDI, which is one code to identify product families. Then you have UDI DIs, which are device identifiers to identify certain models within a product family. And where it gets complicated, you also have the UDI PI, which stands for production information. And that's really specific for the produced device. So let's say you have a batch of medical devices, you assign a batch number or a lot number that will be on there. And depending on what kind of device it is, it might have a serial number instead of a lot number, or an expiry date or a production date. But the UDI as a system is a way, basically to standardize the way of assigning catalog numbers. Companies already assign article numbers or catalog numbers to identify a device in their own system, in their own ERP system. But this is a standardized way that you can apply onto any type of medical device, including software, including hardware equipment, anything, to make sure that there is a traceable identification of those devices. That's basically, in short, the UDI. So the barcode or the data matrix that's on a label, that's just one part of the UDI, which is the UDI carrier, but the whole UDI system is integrated into your QMS and your technical documentation, basically. So you were saying, well, regulatory people, they tend to shove it into the face of quality people. And they have a point, because the requirements for a unique device identification is in ISO 13485, for example, somewhere in chapter 7. But of course, in Europe with the MDR, it's a regulatory thing. Yes. So it's a combined effort.
So thanks for that. I mean, like I said, for me also, this is like a learning session. So since you drew comparison or tried to draw an analogy to catalog numbers, I know that one of our audience members also had a question that there are SKUs also, SKU codes, which are assigned to devices. How are they different from UDIs exactly, or are they something similar?
A little bit. SKU codes are stock keeping units. They are basically internal codes to locate an article inside someone's stock. So you could have SKU codes in company A and location A, and the same SKU codes, but in a completely different location. You could still use those codes, but the UDI, if you could use the UDI as your identifier to replace your product reference or your SKU code. But they are more or less, it's the same idea. It's to identify a certain article, but UDI is a little bit more encompassing, because you can also include batch number and expiry dates, etc.
And just to understand correctly, is it something like UDI code is going to be public information, like it's publicly available for the device, but SKU is more like an internal thing, like you said? I'm not sure if SKU is publicly available.
Sometimes SKUs can be publicly available. At least the UDI will be publicly available, because the UDI, it has to be printed on the label or the device, or any level of packaging of those devices. The basic UDI, which is the identifier for a product family, that won't be on the product or on the label, but it will still be publicly available through Ethernet when it comes online, because that's a identifier that's also used on your summary of safety, clinical performance. It will be on your declaration of conformity. So they are all public information.
All right, interesting. But like you said, it's all about identifying the device. Okay, so thinking about it, we know that there are different stages of product development. So at what stage of a product life cycle does the manufacturer bring in the UDI for that device?
Well, as a minimum, the short answer, as soon as you want to register a device, you want to submit it for a CE registration by a notified body, or you want, if in case of class 1, you want to self-certify this as a manufacturer, again in Europe, then you would need to have UDI DIs assigned. And to be fair, I think every manufacturer is going to use the GS1 system. So that means they would have to request some GTIMs from GS1. But they need to have it identified in their technical documentation what models will have what UDI DIs, and also a basic UDI DI for the family. As soon as you want to put something on the market as an MDR product. But this is a little bit different from the requirements when you need to put the UDI on the label, because that's a whole different timeline. It depends on the class of your medical device, the risk class. For risk class 3, you already need to put it on your label as soon as you want to put it on the market as an MDR product. But for class 1 products, that requirement to put the UDI on the label, that's from May 2025. So you still have a lot of years to do that. Well, that was not really a very short answer, but additionally, I would say when you do design and development in early stages, when you are thinking about what kind of variants or models do I want to have for my product, you already need to think about that, because each model or each variant will need to have their own UDI. And if it's equipment and it's configurable, let's say you have some different colors or the connections are in different spaces, so it's configurable, you need to think about, well, when does it need a separate UDI, or can it be all in the same UDI? So,
all right, excellent.
Yeah, it's good to think about it early on in your design and development process. And also to think about it in your design change process, because with certain design changes of your device, you also need to use a new UDI. So in the GS1 terminology, you need to assign a new GTIN.
Correct. And I think that's a very good point, because mostly for people like me who are currently not working on the product development side, this was more like something we always felt is a requirement that comes in the later part, like just when you're about to bring the device into the market. But looks like you're saying, that you have to think about it from the design and development stage itself. So that brings a lot of clarity. Thanks so much, Vincent. Okay. At this point, I just want to quickly pause and see, does anybody in the audience have any questions before we proceed to the next part?
Yeah, Anushree. So I have a question for Vincent. So Vincent, this is Mukund. So I've been working in the medical device field, healthcare field. So the question which I had was, UDI specifically has two different aspects, I would say. One is the device identifier and other one is the production identifier. So do we need to, are there any specific rules or regulations that we have to follow certain naming standards? Why I am coming to this is, there was one of the products which I was working on for a startup. They had a single product. It was a SAMD, software as a medical device. Mm-hmm. So we couldn't identify a specific product line or anything of that sort. So are they very rigid on the naming convention?
Well, the naming convention, there's no name aspect to the UDI, but even for software as a medical device, you need to assign a UDI. So you need to identify a product family, even though you only have one version of your software, one variant of your software, you still need to assign a UDI. In the law, in the European law, the MDR says, well, the European Commission will designate a few standards or specifications to implement the UDI, and GS1 is one of them. And as I mentioned before, I think most manufacturers will use GS1 because they are already so widespread across the world and used in retail. So in essence, this means you need to at least get one GTIN or one AON code and assign it to a product, even if you only have one product and one variant. And the GS1, they will say they have a specification, they call it the general specification, if I'm correct. In there, it will say, well, how will you actually, what information does there need to be in the UDI, in the barcode? How should you identify your product, in what format? So I would definitely check out the GS1 general specification to see, well, what do I actually need to do? What do I need to put in my software or on my device?
Thanks, Vincent. It was really helpful.
Yeah, just to add on that, for software, you won't have a batch number or an expiry date, but the GS1 general specifications, they will say, well, there's also a way to implement the software version in the UDI. So for software, that would be more applicable.
All right. Okay, great. And I think we do have specific questions on the software part. But before we go on to that, again, how is UDI different from GMDN? The reason I ask this is because I'm a medical writer and I write a lot of clinical evaluation reports. And we have been talking about the GMDN, the Global Medical Device Nomenclature codes that are assigned. And of course, that's for the type of device. That's not like for a specific product. That's the kind of product that it is. So I know that you've already explained this, but since these are some of the questions that we got from the audience members, I think maybe we can throw a little bit more light on this, how UDI differs from a GMDN.
Yeah, a GMDN, the Global medical device nomenclature, the name says it, nomenclature, it's a way to identify what kind of device it is. So I can have two brands and they both make a wound patch or a wound dressing. They will have the same GMDN code because they're both wound patches. Their intended use is to put on a certain type of wound maybe. So they will share the GMDN, but in no way will they share the same UDI. The wound patches from different brands, they will have their own UDI, DI. So the GMDN, it's a way to identify in what product group they are in, while a UDI, DI or a UDI will help identify them in a certain database, which will be EUDEMED. In EUDEMED, you will also need to identify in what kind of product group your device is in, but they will call it the EMDN, the European Medical Device Nomenclature. So that's a little bit different. They will copy it from the Italian nomenclature, but you have to translate it. But it will be more or less the same as the Italian nomenclature.
Right. Okay. Yes, I think that clarifies. Now, coming to the part that we almost a little bit discussed in the previous question, but how is UDI implemented for SAMDs or software as medical devices? Because in most aspects, when you look at SAMDs, the requirements or the processes tend to differ, of course, from generic medical devices. So when it comes to UDI, how is the process different?
Back in the old days, you would need to have a certain round disc with a hole inside it called a CD. And it would have a label, and that's where you could put on the UDI. But nowadays, most of the software will be downloaded, or they will be made available digitally, or they're in the cloud. So there's no way to put a UDI on a software as a medical device. But just like there's a requirement to put the CE marking somewhere in the software, you can use the same place to add your UDI in the software. So think of it as somewhere in the About menu. Most applications will have some kind of About button or a Help button, or maybe in the startup screen. That's where you can place a UDI, because that will be the same place where you put your CE mark. The data inside the UDI, DI, or inside the UDI for software, it will be, again, the UDI DI or the GS1 GTIN. But for the production information, just like I said to the question maker early on, I forgot his name, I'm sorry. The difference will be in the production information, because instead of a batch number or lot number, there will be a software version inside that part.
And what about multi-configuration scenarios? Because a lot of times you come across those as well. And how do you decide what requires a device identifier and what does not in this multi-configuration scenario?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because that's one of the questions that pops up the most. When do you need to use a separate UDI, DI, or GS1 GTIN for an equipment, because it's configurable? And this also hatches into the question about when to think of applying your UDI in design development process. But let's say you make a medical device sterilization device. It's a piece of equipment. We call it the Super Medical Device Sterilizer product family, and you have a Super Medical Device Sterilizer 2000, and you have a Super Medical Device Sterilizer 3000. So you have two variants in your product family, and the 3000 can have a little bit higher load. It's a little bit bigger. So these two products, they're in the same product family, so they will share the basic UDI DI, and they each have their own UDI DI. But it's configurable, because some hospitals, they want to have their electrical connections in the top left or in the bottom right. And maybe you're a very fashionable medical device manufacturer and you offer it in various colors or various countertops or whatever. So that is the configurable part. But those configurations do not change the intended purpose or the essential performance of your device. So regardless of what configuration there is, it will still have the same UDI DI. So let's say a hospital wants to buy 10 pieces of your super medical device sterilizer 2000 in a blue color and a white countertop. Then those 10 pieces of equipment, they will have the same UDI DI. They will have their own unique serial number, of course. But you might also want to identify the specific configuration that that customer ordered, which can be a stock keeping unit code or whatever, or something in your ERP system to identify a certain configuration. So let's say it's BTR for blue top right connections. That part, the configuration, you can also identify that in your UDI, because again, the GS1 general specifications next to the UDI DI or the lot number or the serial number, they allow for a lot of data to be incorporated into that UDI DI. So I think I can have don't have the example here, but let me see if I can share my screen.
Yeah. All right.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, you can also see my mouse moving or not that?
Yes.
You do. Okay. So a short version of a UDI would be this. In the GS1 terminology, you would identify your UDI DI or GS1 GTIN with 0, 1, and then 14 digits. Actually, I need to have a 0 here, and 87 starts is for the Netherlands. Then the 10 would be the lot number, and 17 would be the expiry date. And this data is the whole UDI. So this is the UDI DI part, and this is the UDI PI part. This is what also gets translated into a machine readable barcode or data matrix, and a human readable interface will be on there. Like I said, UDI DI will be identified with 0, 1, and UDI production information, the second part. It could be the lot number, could be the expiry date, could also be the serial number. And GS1 in their general specifications, they say, well, there are a lot of types of production information that you could include. And I think, not sure about the software version, but let's say the configuration, a certain configuration could be identified with 22. So next to this, you could also have a 22 and then some additional number.
Right.
So it's a very flexible system to put in a lot of data, and your barcode might get longer, or your data matrix might get a little bit more complicated. But you should really check into those general specifications to see which kind of information can you put in there. So I can't change the contents of here, but you could have 10 UDIs for your 10 pieces of equipment that your hospital buys. They will all have the same UDI DI because they all bought the same basic model, the Super MD Sterilizer 2000, but they all will have their unique serial number, but they can also have the same configuration number, which could be BTR, for example, the blue top right. Is it a little bit more clear now, or?
Excellent. I thought, in fact, I was thinking that we should have incorporated examples, and you did it without me asking you. I think this was very helpful because it helped us understand the different components of a UDI and what you actually see on the label. And I think this would be a good point for me to pause and again ask the audience, do you guys have any questions after seeing the slides that were shared by Vincent, or anything else that you want to ask before we move on to the last question for this session? I guess, yes, I think everybody's understanding what we are saying. So that's great. All right. Now, one quick question here. I mean, of course, we're talking about the requirements of UDI, what are the different components of UDI, and all of that. What about the companies that are involved in providing UDI to devices manufacturers? Because I know that a lot of people are not even talking about this. They feel that this is something that they'll probably do internally, but there are companies that are providing UDI. So, can you throw a little bit of light on that as well?
Yeah, I think in essence or minimally, the only companies that need to be involved in the UDI are the ones that are designated by the European Commission, like GS1, to use their specific standard. And for example, at GS1, you need to buy 1 or 10 or 100 or how many you need GTNs. It will cost a company money. But it's the only way to have your unique GTINs and to have them registered at GS1. There are also companies that will help you implement the UDI on your device or on your label. Sometimes they are local companies. I can think of a Dutch company which helps there. But if you have a label on your product, so let's say we're still talking about physical products, and they will have a label on which the batch number and expiry date is printed. Almost all label printers have software, and most of that software will already have the algorithms to produce certain barcodes. So I don't have an example here, I think, but for all retail products, there's always a simple barcode on there because it needs to be at the cash register. They need to be scanned so they know what kind of money they should get from you. But those label printer software applications, most of them already have the GS1 specification in them to produce an EAN 128 barcode or a GS1 data matrix. So you don't need a separate company to help you implement the UDI. And I know about Bartender is a label design program, a label printer application that helps you or that allows you to design a label and include a barcode. And it already includes the GS1 barcodes or the GS1 data matrix. There's also a nice label. I think that's a little bit more, a little bit less used than Bartender. But almost all of the professional label design programs, they already have the algorithms to print a barcode. So you don't need anything additional to implement.
Okay, so I guess, yeah, I think it's better that manufacturers have that sort of capability to do it themselves. And, because that is easier also. You can expedite your processes instead of outsourcing something like this. But
yeah,
yes, it's good.
You could outsource all your regulatory or quality processes, of course, just like logistics or shipping. But most of the companies, they just need a little bit of explanation on, well, what do I need to do in my case? Because what I started with, the UDI is a system to identify all kinds of medical devices, including software, including equipment, including disposables. Most manufacturers just don't know how to translate that system onto their specific case. It's more that they need a little bit of explaining.
All right. Okay. And while we're on this, also one question that had come to us was a general distinction between basic UDI-DI and UDI-DI with some examples if possible. I'm not sure if you'll have them handy right now.
Don't have a lot of examples, but we could start up Google Images, of course.
And I think I also have the member who's asked this question, Shalu, who's been a regular on our sessions. Hi, Shalu.
Everyone.
Hi.
Hi, Vincent. Yeah, so, I put up that question because I faced it many times last 1 year. Of course, I'm not working in this area. I'm really a very technical and R&D person. But most of the times I know myself, but I was not able to convince lots of people the difference between basic one and then UDI-DI. So I really had to give some examples, but which could not convince them. So I thought it's a good chance from an expert to have some examples so that it makes it more clear.
Sure. I can share two slides on here. So this is one slide that I showed before. This is an example of a UDI, or UDI carry in the form of a barcode or in the form of a data matrix. The UDI DI is the first part, so the 0, 1, and then the GS1 GTIN if you use the GS1 system. And the GTIN or the UDI DI is the thing that you need to buy each time from the GS1 company for each model that you have, if you implement some changes. But as soon as you have at least one GTIN, you can configure your own basic UDI/DI. The basic UDI/DI, which is to identify a certain product family, does not come in the form of a single number. In GS1, they call it the global model number, the GMN, in which you would need to state your GS1 company prefix and then self-define some kind of internal number to identify your product family. And this will be your basic UDI/DI. And I know that this first part looks a lot like a UDI/DI, but this is just the company identifier. So as a new medical device manufacturer, I design and develop a certain medical device. And at some point, I will go to GS1 to buy 10 GTINs, so 10 UDI/DIs, because I have 10 models of my medical device. I will register myself as a company at GS1, and they will then assign to me a company prefix. So the first few numbers that are in there, because that company prefix will also be in all of the GTINs that you will buy. So for a basic UDI/DI, you don't need to buy a separate GTIN. You only need to have the company prefix that GS1 provides you as soon as you buy one or more GTINs. And the rest of the basic UDI/DI, so the internal number to identify a product family, and this is, for example, Eurolon 1001, which is the identifier for a product family called Eurolon. I can define this myself as a manufacturer, and it can contain numbers, it can contain letters, and it can contain up to, I think, 25 characters. And the algorithm of GS1 for the global model number, they will add two check characters. And those check characters, if I don't want to get too technical here, but let's say someone else says, well, this is the basic UDI/DI of my product, then I can validate with GS1, is that an actual valid basic UDI/DI, or did someone provide me with a fake one? So the algorithm of GS1, they will say, well, for this combination of a company prefix and this internal number, I will add this in my algorithm, the check characters, to say, well, this is indeed valid. So I cannot change this anymore. If I change one number or one letter in here or one number in my company prefix, the check characters will be different. So that's how GS1 can verify or validate a certain basic UDI/DI. So does that answer your question, Shalou?
Yes, I guess it's more clear, because what I used to do is tell people this is just one basic UDI for product family, and you can have 10 UDIs, DIs under it. And they were really very confused, because I was really not. I guess now it makes it more clear, because I myself know, okay, this is your product family, then you can have 10 versions of the same instrument, but you don't need 10 basic UDI/DIs for that. You just have one.
Absolutely correct. In general, you could say that if you have one technical file or technical dossier, that will have one basic UDI.
UDI. Yeah. That's what I was trying to tell them. Like examples I gave, you have one, suppose some ortho implant of one type, then it's fine. And then you have it in 1 mm, 2 mm, 3 mm, 4 mm diameters. So you don't really need to have 4 basic UDIs. That was my simplest way to tell them.
That's absolutely correct. If it's
just one tech doc, one DMR you have, and just different variations inside. Correct. Until unless you change the intended scope, use, or design.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. As long as the models inside a product family or inside one technical file have the same intended purpose, the same basic way of production, the same more or less materials that are actually critical for the medical device, then they can all be in the same technical file and they will share one basic UDI.
Yeah, I guess it should make now things very clear.
And I see that we have another question. Please go ahead. Jay, I think you have a question.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit over here with respect to UDI. Okay. Actually, I come from a segment of manufacturing of medical devices. Okay. So in this process of manufacturing here in India, we need to get an approval from BIS, okay, Bureau of Indian Standards. So here we apply for electrical safety over there. So like if I have different models, okay, versions of one particular X-ray equipment, so they too also issue one number to us, and we can have different versions for our BIS certification with respect to our X-ray machine. I just want to add that it is similar to having a BIS certification, and here in India it is generally termed as ISI certificate. People in general refer to as ISI certificate. I just want to add that it is similar to that. The process is similar.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. No problem.
That's an interesting perspective. Thank you so much, Ed. All right. So I'm done with my questions. Just a final call. Does anybody have any further questions?
Yeah, I had one question. So if the intended use of my device changes, so what would be the impact on UDI? Will the device identifier as well as the production identifier, everything change?
Yes, according to me, yes.
Yeah, that's correct. If you look into the MDR, for example, I think Annex 6, Part C about the UDI system, actually chapter 3.9 in there, they will say, well, for certain changes to a medical device, you will need to implement a new UDI DI, and it has to do with traceability. So the UDI DI is different for different levels of packaging. You can have one UDI DI for a single packaging of a device, and then have a multi-packaging, so 10 devices in a box, will have a different UDI DI. Well, let's say you change your packaging to contain 20 devices. That's a change that would require you to use a new UDI DI on that packaging level. Because the UDI DI is used in logistics as well. It allows a hospital, for example, just to scan a box and record in their logistical system. Well, now, because we scanned that one box, we have 10 of those devices. And if you as a manufacturer decide, well, I'm going to put in 20 in a box now, then the hospital won't know about it unless you change the UDI DI. And that's also true for other aspects, just like if you provide it sterile or not, or if you add certain warnings to the device. So really check in the applicable regulations on when to change the UDI DI.
Yeah, Vincent, so that comes to my second question. So you talked about the multi-packaging, right? So in this case, does it mean that the device has a UDI as well as the multi-level packaging? So each level of packaging has a separate UDI?
Yes, that's correct. just like my example, you can have a package for a single medical device. So let's say the wound patch again, the pouch in which there is a wound patch is the single packaging that will have a UDI. But I always, as a manufacturer, sell them in a box of 10 pouches. So the box will have a different UDI. Ideally, I would sell a box containing 30 smaller boxes of 10 wound patches to sell to my distributors, for example. So that packaging will also have a different UDI. And these levels of packaging are also something that you have to register in Eudamed if you go on the European market. So you will have to, that module in Eudamed is not yet live, but as soon as it will be, you will have to register your product family using the basic UDI, but you also need to register your product models with their unique UDIs, but you also need to register, well, in what kind of packaging configurations do I put this on the market? Do I only put this on the market as a single packaging? So for example, equipment, you will most probably put your equipment as a single package on the market. But in the case of wound patches, you might put them on the market in boxes of 10 or boxes of 30. So you have to define, well, this UDI basically contains 30 of the other UDIs, which contain 10 of the other UDIs.
Okay, thanks, Vincent. It was really helpful. Yeah.
So, any other questions? Because I'm also listening and learning. I have exhausted my questions. Vincent has helped me with all those. Anybody has any questions before we wrap this up? Oh, looks like we're good.
Guess not, yeah. I think as soon as the device registration model in Eudamed will go live and people start to see how this system works, the system of UDIs and different packaging levels, when that will be online, I think that's when people will start to understand this a bit more.
Exactly. And I'm so glad that we were able to cover this before that happened so that people can watch this and understand. And also thank you so much for using practical examples where you showed us different labels and what constitutes a UDI or the entire code for it. So thank you so much for that, Vincent. I, for one, have learned a lot today because generally most of my sessions, I'm also participating and giving answers. But here I knew that this was going to be very unidirectional, where I would be asking questions because there is so much more for me to learn in this space. And I cannot thank you enough.
Yeah, no problem. It's nice to be here.
Yes. And any final word before we conclude this session, Vincent?
I would say go to LinkedIn, search for Medical Device Project or MD Project, and follow our company page because sometimes we share a few tips and tricks on the UDI or when there's a new guidance available or training, not just about the UDI, of course, but QA and RA in general. But follow us on LinkedIn, and if it's helpful, you can always email to info@mdproject.nl in case you have very specific questions, and maybe we can help from a distance or on site.
Excellent. And of course, we'll be following that because who doesn't need tips and tricks right now in the regulatory space? Because it's so important. And I feel that manufacturers also are looking for a lot of guidance. So thanks for that. And I really enjoyed the session. And with this, we have come to the end of this session on UDI requirements. I'll see you guys next time on another session of Sit Down Talk with MDRP. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.